Here's a little tutorial showing how to use the short cone attachment. You'll see when you get it that there's a little gap at the top. Now I found that every time I put my wire in that gap it would ping out when I started coiling. So what I suggest you do is hammering one side and then the other side of this top gap, and what you'll do is you'll hammer just the tops slightly together, which means that when you thread the wire through that gap, it's not going to just jump out under tension when you start coiling and turning the handle. So I would suggest that if you're having this problem, that's a little bit of troubleshooting. Now you will have coiled around and then cut it off, but leave a tail. You don't have to, but I'm just saying, and then obviously remove the top, and I leave the tail because I'll show you why. It just means you don't have to plug it with a bead. You can use it as a coiled bead. So with that cut end, I'll just turn that around, or snip it and neaten it, but just, you can turn it around to make it a little bit smaller at the top when you come to thread it with wire again, and even out that bit. And now with the tail end, grip the very, very end, turn it into a little circle, and then spiral it. And it doesn't have to be neat because no one's going to see this, but you just keep rolling the wire around itself into a spiral shape until it comes and sits and fills that central base gap of the cone. And try and position the center circle at the center of the base, because when you come to thread it with wire again, it means it won't wobble around with that big gap. So that's how I would use the cones if I wasn't plugging them with beads. So you can do that if you're making earrings. You'll obviously do it to 2 of them. And again, just take your round nose pliers, make a little circle, and then roll the wire around. Create a spiral. And then just keep going until you roll it and roll it until it sits like a little lid on top of that big space at the base of the cone, and just position it into the center. And then with the other short end of the cone, the tip of the cone, just cut off any excess, because if you're making earrings you want them to be the same length, and then any sort of uneven areas you can just squeeze together. So when you want to make them into earrings, you'll have to get, this is 0.8 millimeters, meter, 20 gauge wire I'm using, and I'm going to thread it through the base. Take a little silver bead to plug the very, very end to make the tip. I'm just squeezing the end together to make sure that last bit of that cone is not sticking out in any way. I don't want the cut end of the cone to be projecting because it will catch. Then feed a bead. Of course it doesn't have to be silver, it can be any color. And then make a head pin. So just make a little bend in the wire, squish it all together so it's doubled up. If it's too long, cut through the doubled up end so it's very neat and short and you hardly notice it, doesn't protrude. And then cut off the spool. And of course you could put a bead first if you wanted to, But then with the projecting end, just roll the wire around and around your round nose pliers until it sits at the very top. That's if you're going to hang them with a point downwards. Of course, you can hang them the other way around as well. But I quite like earrings that sort of hang. They're quite elegant. Now this is another way of doing it. You can plug the open end with a bead and make a head pin that way and hang them the opposite direction. So that means you don't have to make the coil at the base of the cone. So if you've got beads, whoops, that head pin was just too small. But I'm going to make the earrings with the putting it through and hanging it this direction. So make a bigger head pin, because now I know that bead hole is too big. So I'm going to double up the wire. There's so much experimentation when you're making things, and I'm going to just bring it around again, because I know my head pin, see, I'm bending it to a right angle. My head pin must not fall out of the bead, so that holds it. And then I make the top link out of the projecting end later, but I'm just going to do the two, just working in tandem. Again, make a little head pin, and then I'm going to curl that around again, double it up, and then I'm going to, once I've curled it around twice, I'm going to bend it to a right angle so that the bead sits on that, it can't fall through, and then I've got to make the top links. So you could put a bead before you do this top link. Again, so many variations. I'm just coiling and coiling around. So there's my top link for my earring. That's one earring done. All I need is a ear wire for that. And these are very fun as earrings because they're little cone drops plugged with a bead, and of course you can put a more colourful bead to match your outfits. But they give you this impression of solid metal when it's a solid cone of wire like that. So open up your ear wires and link them on, and it's as simple as that. So these cones can be very useful as a unit in a lot of different jewellery pieces, not just earrings, but you can use them in so many different ways. I mean, this is quite a fancy way of making a spike necklace. You can hang them off as tassels. You can use them as bead caps to feed a multi-thread bead necklace. You see, you just feed all your wires in there. You can make them in little cascades of beads coming out. You can put chains coming through them. This is a hammered wire. Here I've stretched it as well. So do have a play and enjoy using the cone attachment. Many thanks for watching.